The brittle snap of pine branches echoed outside the cabin, followed by the metallic squeal of a door latch forcing open. Cold mountain air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet cedar and trespass. She strutted inside with audacity only arrogance can breed. Clipboard, tape measure, and that smug smirk. The self-appointed queen of the HOA thought she was walking into another easy victory. But she wasn't alone. In the flicker of firelight sat the last person she expected, a federal judge, joined by the state attorney general himself. The question wasn't whether she'd be caught, but how far her downfall would spread. 6 months earlier, the lake was still quiet. Pine Hollow had been a retreat for teachers, carpenters, and retirees for generations. Small cabins tucked between evergreens, children fishing off weathered docks, neighbors who knew each other by name. But money crept in like a slow infection. Developers bought shoreline property, glossy brochures sold visions of exclusive lakefront living. And suddenly, the HOA wasn't about community, it was about control. At the center of this takeover stood Bryn Ashworth Sterling, HOA president, silver Tesla gleaming like a trophy, and eyes fixed on elevating Pine Hollow. Her version of elevation meant bleeding old residents dry with fines until they sold, then flipping properties for profit. On paper, her HOA had authority over landscaping, dock maintenance, even paint color. But behind the curtain was something darker. Residents whispered about forged violations, disappearing funds, and intimidation that left widows in tears. Yet no one dared challenge her outright. At least, not until Judge Miriam Blackwood arrived. Grieving her husband and seeking refuge, Miriam had chosen the lake cabin Harold once loved for its quiet mornings and red cardinal songs. But Bryn saw the new widow as the perfect target. She didn't know that this widow carried 20 years on the federal bench and nothing left to lose. And Miriam wasn't the only one watching. The Attorney General's office had begun sniffing around Pine Hollow, tracking whispers of fraud. The stage was set for a collision Bryn never imagined. What happens when a predator storms into a cabin and finds a courtroom waiting inside? Judge Miriam Blackwood wasn't the kind of woman Bryn should have provoked. Dignified in grief, but sharpened by years sentencing liars, thieves, and predators, she carried sorrow like armor. Her sanctuary at Pine Hollow wasn't luxury, it was survival. A fireplace that still smelled of Harold's cedar pipe tobacco. A memorial fence he'd built with trembling hands. And a cat named Gavel, her last living link to a life stolen by cancer. Bryn, on the other hand, thrived on intimidation. At 45, she carried herself like a suburban monarch, tape measure snapping like a whip, legal jargon misquoted like scripture. To her, homeowners weren't neighbors, they were prey. A family fined into bankruptcy over a wheelchair ramp. An elderly widow forced to remove her late husband's memorial garden. A single mother billed for her children's chalk drawings on the driveway. But Bryn had grown careless. Her scheme wasn't just harassment, it was theft. HOA accounts drained by hundreds of thousands, funneled through shell contractors, and reinforced with insurance scams disguised as emergency claims. And when whispers of state-level fraud reached the Attorney General's office, they needed someone inside Pine Hollow. Someone Bryn thought was just another victim. That's where Miriam came in. What Bryn didn't know. Every violation letter she pushed through Miriam's door was being preserved as evidence. Every HOA meeting she chaired was being recorded by residents with hidden microphones. And the lake cabin she was about to storm wasn't empty. It had become the headquarters for a sting operation. It began small, as it always did. A letter citing non-compliant dock stain. Another demanding excessive noise fines for the sound of wind chimes. Each violation more absurd than the last. Each fine escalating into intimidation. Bryn's army of clipboard enforcers documented Miriam's property like paparazzi, searching for flaws that didn't exist. But Miriam wasn't just cataloging the harassment. She was building a case. Courtroom instincts sharpened every letter into ammunition. Neighbors who once feared retaliation began slipping her envelopes under the door. Copies of fraudulent notices, bank statements hinting at missing funds, and testimonies of years of abuse. Then came the turning point. Bryn broke into Miriam's yard during a supposed emergency inspection, leaving the gate wide open. That evening, Gavel vanished. 3 days later, the cat was found battered, dehydrated, and clinging to life after being chased into a storm drain by Bryn's landscaping crew. It was no longer petty harassment. It was cruelty, and it ignited fury in the community. Behind the cabin's shuttered windows, Miriam and investigators spread evidence across tables. Bank ledgers, fraudulent insurance filings, photographs of illegal entries. The Attorney General himself had taken interest, calling the case a potential statewide fraud ring. Still, Bryn pressed harder. She filed complaints to discipline Miriam, doctored photographs to paint her as the violator, and whispered to blogs that a rogue judge was weaponizing the law. She thought she could destroy Miriam's career before Miriam destroyed hers. But Bryn made one fatal mistake. She underestimated her target's allies. Because while she plotted, Pine Hollow residents united. Walt Henderson, who'd lived on the lake since the 60s, organized neighbors. Retired FBI analyst Patricia Donnelly connected dots Bryn hoped no one would see. And Miriam? She waited, methodical and patient, letting Bryn dig her own grave. Until the night Bryn chose to break into the cabin. The storm hit just after dusk. Wind off the lake howled against the windows, rain tapping like impatient fingers. Bryn arrived in her usual uniform, athleisure, designer boots, and entitlement. She pushed through the cabin door without hesitation, the creak of hinges announcing her trespass. Clipboard in hand, she began muttering about structural violations. But the firelight revealed something she hadn't expected. At the cabin table sat Judge Miriam Blackwood, black robes draped over the chair like armor. Beside her, the state attorney general, reviewing documents with the calm precision of a surgeon. Surrounding them, boxes of files, photographs, and evidence tags that bore Bryn's name. For a moment, silence drowned the storm. Then the attorney general lifted a page, a forged insurance claim already stamped with Bryn's signature. Behind it, records of HOA funds drained into offshore accounts. And worst of all, video stills. Bryn herself, leaving Miriam's gate open the night gavel nearly died. The cabin wasn't a retreat anymore. It was a courtroom, and Bryn had just walked straight into it. Outside, headlights flickered. Walt and other neighbors stood as silent witnesses, their presence unshakable. Cameras hidden in rafters recorded every word. Bryn tried to backpedal, insisting it was all misunderstanding. But the trap had already closed. The Attorney General slid a warrant across the table like a verdict. Miriam's voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the storm. This is no longer an HOA dispute. It's a criminal conspiracy. And Bryn's empire began to collapse. The arrest came before dawn. Sirens shattered the quiet lake, red and blue lights flashing against rain-slick water. Federal agents and state investigators moved in, seizing documents, computers, and property records. Neighbors watched from porches as Bryn and her husband were led out in handcuffs, their designer world unraveling in chains. Her shrieks about innocent inspections rang hollow against the weight of evidence. The tape measure, once her symbol of control, clattered uselessly to the ground. Inside the cabin, investigators cataloged everything. Fraudulent bylaws, forged fines, bank transfers tied to shell companies, and insurance documents filed before fires ever started. The picture was undeniable. Bryn hadn't been running an HOA. She'd been running a criminal enterprise. But the most damning evidence came from her own arrogance. That night, cameras captured her breaking into the cabin, trespassing into what she thought was empty. Instead, she trespassed into justice itself. By sunrise, Pine Hollow was no longer under siege. Months later, the courtroom overflowed. Residents packed the benches, some clutching photos of loved ones harassed or driven out by Bryn's reign. Federal prosecutors laid out the evidence: embezzlement, fraud, trespassing, animal cruelty, attempted insurance scams. Each count stacked like bricks, sealing her fate. The jury needed only hours. Guilty on all charges. Life sentences without parole. Pine Hollow transformed. Walt Henderson was elected HOA president with unanimous support. New bylaws required transparency, community approval for fines, and protections for elderly and minority residents. What was once a place of fear became a model for reform, studied nationwide. Judge Miriam Blackwood, though scarred by loss, stood at the heart of it. Her husband's memory lived in every reform, every protection, every child drawing chalk rainbows without fear of fines. And Gavel, fully recovered, prowled the rebuilt cabin like a guardian of justice. Bryn thought she'd break into a widow's retreat and intimidate her into silence. Instead, she'd broken into a sting operation that dismantled her empire. And the irony? Her downfall began the moment she mistook a lake cabin for easy prey, not realizing she was walking into the Attorney General's war room. Justice wasn't just served. It was written in firelight, carved into law, and sealed with the sound of chains. Have you ever fought an HOA tyrant? Share your story. Your voice might save someone else's home.